Hey everyone, welcome back to Brewbound's continuing coverage of how the beer industry is adjusting to the impact of the novel coronavirus disease, COVID-19. My name is Justin Kendall, and I am the editor of Brewbound, and I am still in my 455 square foot studio apartment in Massachusetts. Joining me via Google Hangout is Rabobank Analysts Jim Watson and Bourcard Nesin. You might also know them from the Liquid Assets podcast. Guys, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Is your studio feeling any smaller by the day?
Yeah, the walls
closing in.
They are totally closing in on me. My dog is actually sick of me too. So that's something I never thought would happen. He is very codependent, and now he is less codependent than before.
Yeah, I asked Jim. I got excited and I went and grabbed a beer and for this interview. And I said, Jim, why don't you grab a beer? He's like, I don't have any. I'm like, what's wrong with you? He's like, oh, because I'm not in my house. I had to escape my kids.
So you guys run away and find some spare space to do this, definitely.
Yeah.
So you guys are social distancing as well.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Quarantining, you name it.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's what we're all supposed to do. So the last couple of weeks, consumer behavior has shifted to stocking up as the coronavirus is spread across the country, and virtually all on-premise business dried up. A lot of the winners so far have been larger players and trusted brands. We've only just begun to see the pop, though, in scan data numbers, as you pointed out, Bourcard. How long is this period of stocking up sustainable?
I can take that one first. We don't know is the most correct answer, and scanner data is not nearly as hasn't yet captured the full scale of this shift in consumer purchasing of food and beverages. We saw, I think, the real moment when people started buying in mass was the 12th of Thursday, March 12th. And that was the most recent scanner data we have is from the 14th, the week ending March 14th. So what I'm hearing from grocery stores, which is the main beneficiaries of the purchasing behavior, is that they're seeing between 50 and 70% increase year over year, and in purchasing, which is not yet reflected in the data. And for beverage alcohol, I think they're keeping pace with that, at least thus far. And that includes for independent liquor stores.
I mean, we saw this spike, especially in non-alcoholic, a little bit before that too. So even the week of the 8th, there was, bottled water was already up 30+%. The week of the 14th, it was basically doubled year over year. So I mean, we're seeing some of it. It is a really good question how long this can last, because the truth is, drinking occasions are certainly not on the increase. And as people are buying cases of beer, it's hard to imagine, they're not bringing them to a party. So these are going to be sitting in pantries. So I think we're starting to see in the last 2 days, I've started to see the very first signs of maybe a slowdown in the grocery channel. But I think this is going to be really regional. So like areas that have been hit hard, like New York, we're probably going to see the earlier stock up, and also the earlier, stop to that stock up, where, in a market that hasn't been hit hard yet, you might have another 3-4 weeks of stocking up to come.
Yeah. I would also say that first off, the first day was like Thursday, and supermarkets, national chains were reporting all-time single-day highest sales. One of the biggest reasons that happened is because of nothing was out of stock. Like, people were able to buy tons of stuff, and they were able to leave with a full cart. Since then, out of stocks, long lines, other things have probably actually moderated some of the what would otherwise be a continued elevated level of grocery buying. That indicates to me that we can't really assume that this purchasing behavior is going to tail off super quickly because not everyone's going to, as Jim said, it's regional. Not everyone's going to buy everything all at once. People kind of hit the panic button at different times. And it's also worth mentioning that the CDC recommends on their website that people have at least 14 days worth of food, which if you self-quarantine after contracting the virus, you can't go out. And so the CDC, interestingly, also recommends knowing how to buy food for delivery.
Mm-hmm. And we've seen the spike in delivery orders too. I find myself using Instacart now, Amazon Fresh, Shipped, all for the first time. I'm using Drizzly more. So once this crisis passes, do you believe that this is going to lead to a change in consumer behavior? Are we going to see more people adopting these online ordering platforms?
I just want to speak really quickly before I answer your question and say, with online, with in-store purchasing increasing so quickly, we also have to say, okay, obviously online is going to increase quickly too, right? The question is it rising more quickly than in-store? And that kind of depends on the channel, in the extent to which that's true, but absolutely, yes, e-commerce is booming for an obvious reason, right? People are looking at, traditionally they may have not wanted to buy groceries because they didn't want to get the wrong cucumber or they didn't want to get the wrong cut of meat or whatever, and that was a risk for them, and they weren't willing to take it in some cases. Now the risk is, what if I get COVID-19? Or if I contract the virus and risk my life. So life risk versus cucumber, people are making the choice to shop online. And what I've heard is, online grocery is growing at a rate that's probably twice that of in-store. And that's interesting because a lot of these players aren't able to satisfy demand entirely. That there's a lot of people who can't get delivery windows. I was speaking to one e-commerce manager today that said they would be surprised if 30 to 40% of demand was met, meaning 60 to 70% of demand for e-commerce is left on the table because people can't get deliveries, can't get what they need for a delivery window, or there's so many out of stocks that people just can't get what they need in the first place. And that will be an important factor in whether or not people adopt that technology down the road.
I'm definitely feeling that because my Amazon Fresh windows are closing quickly and you kind of got to grab them when you see them. And my Instacart delivery is only half filled, those sort of things. So I'm kind of being forced out into the world as well, to the grocery store in those instances.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it is tough because you're getting all the new consumers to these platforms in a time where the performance really isn't there. You're not getting a great customer experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think a lot of people are going to stick around after this. To use Bourcard's cucumber example, like the cucumber risk, a lot of people that was kind of overblown, right? You were like, oh, what happens if I can't pick my own produce and can't? It turns out these services are all really good and give you really good products, and almost everybody I know who's tried it find that there are risks of that they weren't going to get the right products during normal times to be kind of overblown. So I think you're going to get a lot of people who adopt this for the first time, found out the risks that they thought were there, or just the fact that sometimes if you haven't done it before, it's the hurdle of literally setting up an account and entering a credit card number and doing it for the first time. And once you've cleared some of those, I think a lot of people are going to stick around.
Yeah.
I think the cucumber risk could be the new Waffle House index.
Yeah.
The 2020s Buffalo. Anyways, that's not actually even the same thing at all.
Quarantining gets to all of us differently.
I'm used to social distancing. It's a matter of daily life for me, even under normal conditions. But so to Jim's point, right? I don't disagree that more people will use online grocery pre-COVID versus like normal times afterwards, right? The question is it, is grocery going to maintain the same elevated levels of e-commerce, food and beverage, alcohol too, after this goes away? And I feel very, 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 very confident that that's just not going to be possible, because so much of the way I think about e-commerce is people adopt new technology and new habits when it solves a problem that is big enough for them to change their behavior. People don't change their behavior that easily. If you've ever been in a relationship, you'll know, like, like you never actually change anything. I maybe that was a bad example.
Is your wife listening? Is she in the room? You okay, buddy?
I just heard her leave the bathroom. Anyways,
Blink twice if you need some help.
No, but my point is that you know, people that haven't adopted online grocery haven't done so for a reason, right? It's not because they didn't necessarily know about it. Yes, some people will use it for the first time, but it's because it didn't solve that big of a problem. So let me put it in a really easy to understand example. If I used to go to work every day, and on the way home, I would stop by a grocery store and pick up my food or whatever. I'd stop by Walmart in my car. It's part of my daily routine and it's super convenient, right? Now I don't go to work. I'm working from home. I'm scared of a deadly pandemic. Like I'm no longer going past the store and I'm scared, right? There is a huge value to me that's situational, that when that situation disappears, that person's going to continue to drive to work and drive back from work and stop by the grocery store. And that means that the mass amount of purchasing will disappear. And a lot of those people might discontinue the use. They might forget their Instacart password in the next 6 months. I don't know. But like, the question is like, how many of those people that started using it for the first time will then kind of go back to it in a way that fits their lifestyle under normal circumstances? And what I think is that's a much lower number than the people who use it now, even if that will go up slightly above pre-COVID levels.
I think the question becomes too is how many consumers will be willing to go back to sort of what we knew as normal life before.
Yeah,
and that's a big unknown, and I don't want to put that on you guys to try and answer, but I think that's a question we've all got to look at is, what is the new normal, and is the convenient...
I don't know that what the eventual new normal is, but I do kind of expect a slow recovery to our old norms. Yeah. Right? Like in a couple months when people are more comfortable going out, I don't think we're going to go to the exact same fully crowded tap room or restaurant that we were at before, not for a little while at least.
Yeah, I think that in times of great uncertainty, without evidence to the contrary, one should assume regression to the mean. Mm-hmm. And I think that's like a general rule is, if there are so many things that are uncertain, if you don't know and you don't have any evidence saying that that's what's going to happen, I really think you have to assume people are going to be eager to go back to what is considered a normal life. I think, is the new normal like a constant barragement of pestilence around the world that, that's I don't think that's normal, right? I think if this disease goes away quickly, we can expect a fairly quick normalization of consumer behavior. If it's extended, I think that makes it less likely, but still, I just have trouble believing that I don't see any reason to believe that consumers are going to have a meaningful change to their behavior long term.
One of the changes in behavior that we've seen so far has been a going back to tried and true brands. We saw that first pop of Nesin data through, I think it was March 14th, that all segments were up, and even brands that hadn't been growing for years, like Boston Lager or Sierra Nevada Pale, were up. Are we going to see a shift in consumption away from higher end premium options to more affordable ones or more tried and true brands in the coming year or years now? I just wonder about that as, we're recording this on Thursday, March 26th, and we've just seen that spike in the unemployment numbers. So obviously discretionary income is going to change for a lot of folks.
I think the two things are related but a little bit separate. The switch to either flagships or like the familiar brands, and that to me is just like a real temporary, like we're all scared right now. Plus, we're buying really big packs, so this is the time just like, hey
Yeah.
man, I'm just gonna make sure I get like the thing I know what it is. I'm gonna feel comfortable with it with a 30 pack in my fridge, and that's pretty easy. I think the premiumization question with the unemployment numbers out today, with a looming recession, yeah, that's going to be a long term effect. So I mean, we're already seeing price drive a lot of the sales, a lot more than normal. I think the craft sales that were out, it was the first time in a long time where volume grew more than dollar sales. So I kind of think that is just the beginning there, that we're going to see a lot more.
Yeah, I would say if overall alcohol sales are rising by 60% and Bud Light grows by 30%, I don't think that's a good story for Bud Light necessarily. So even if those are growing in terms of, and that's an abstract, I don't know, and I have not looked at Bud Light's growth numbers, but like I would just say it is on a relative basis, and if that's what you're seeing, then good for those big brands. I think it has a lot to do with format. I think behaviorally, you know, I've had Belgian triples sit in my fridge for a long time because I can't drink a 750 milliliter, like 9% beer all by my lonesome, right? I'm drinking a Maine beer company beer now, mostly just to show off for your audience. But if I'm drinking alone, I'm going to I'm not sharing it. I'm not necessarily kind of flexing, if you will, for my beer bros. So there might be some other aspects where I've spoken to like craft brewers, in which I'm like, what do you drink at home? And they're like, oh, Mexican lager. It's just clean, crisp. I love it. It gets the job done, and that's one of the things that I drink as my home beer. So it might just be kind of the occasion calls for it, as well as the format, as well as that safety and something you recognize.
So for those small brewers who had relied on their taproom model, we've seen that be so successful for so many over the years, as a way to brand build. And many didn't even have to sell outside of their four walls and didn't distribute and weren't in off-premise retailers. In the interim, what's the solution for them? How do they sort of make it through?
Put your head between your legs and pray.
Yeah, hope for some really great government assistance, and rent relief, and and it's not even small business loans, but I mean it's the loans won't necessarily do it. It's just small business grants. For anybody who can shift a little bit to the curbside sales to delivery, that had, if you had some other option to start, right? You had a 20% of your sales in distribution, and you can ramp that up a bunch and try to get like lean for a couple months. That's one thing. But if you're purely taproom and you're starting up a delivery option now, good luck trying to get into distribution now. I think that's gonna be really hard.
Yeah. So there's two sides to that. One is the e-commerce component. Are you trying to attract new consumers and or build a new channel for direct to consumer delivery, right? Without going through distribution. There are 10,000 wineries, 7,000 breweries, plus 2,000 distillers, tons of restaurants, tons of bars, all kind of sending help me please, like SOS to their consumers. And in beer, like again, if we come back to the consumer problem, like consumers are trying to stock up on things because they're scared, right? they don't have a lot of headspace to try and help their local brewer unless that brewer means a lot to them. And there aren't that many breweries in the country that have that kind of consumer relationship. So there's very few, I think, organizations in the United States that will be able to use e-commerce like delivery to recover more than just a fraction of their sales. It's a palliative, it's not a cure. When it comes to going into distribution, having that is a tool that you need to have before now, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about distributors, if we're talking about retailers rationalizing their SKU counts, and every brand on the universe is now going to all these e-commerce retailers or these other retailers saying, please, please, please give us some space. We're desperate. Please help us. We want
no one has any capacity for this.
Nobody's going to be there to listen to you. And so for me, if you weren't prepared beforehand, there are very, very few stories that are going to come out of this and be happy ones.
Well, from what we're already hearing is retailers are already reassessing shelf space. They're not considering resets. We're hearing whispers that wholesalers are focusing on brands that they think will weather the storm and sort of setting a line there of the ones they think are going to make it and supporting them and kind of, letting the others wither. And so how much simplifying do you guys think we're going to see in both the retail and wholesale tiers?
So we're hearing the same thing, that the grocery stores are pushing, for a smaller number of brands and wanting extra, supplies of their top sellers. Definitely no category reset. So, it's really like an old school setup with just like, hey, let's get big brands, stack them high and let them fly. And that's like beer from 20 years ago. I don't know how long that's going to last. So this is like all going on through a crazy stock up period, right? So grocery stores are having sales up 50%. That means everybody's all hands on deck trying to get, just literally keep the shelves stocked. I wonder in 6-8 weeks, when we're not in that situation at all, everybody can just slow down for a second and reevaluate and say like, okay, that was cool. We got through the high volume period by my maxing out on the biggest SKUs, but maybe we can go back to, something a little bit more normal after that.
I would agree. I think we should be careful not to overextend what's happening, and that's why Jim said earlier, like the recession and the shelter in place orders and are two different phenomenons. They may kind of end up having the same outcome, which is well-priced premium brands are hurt. But in the case of this stock up, I mean, how long can it last? You asked that kind of the first question. Volume-wise, 40% of craft, right, Jim, is off-premise. I think that's Bart Watson's stat, unrelated to our guest here, Jim. But
we're fans of all Watsons around here.
Yeah. All Watsons are great Watsons. But like, so, I mean, there's going to be a huge shift considering that there will be some lost occasions, there is going to be a meaningful shift of on-premise demand to the off-premise. And even after the stock-up purchasing behavior dissipates to a degree, 33% of calories in the US are consumed out of home, a third. And that's higher for high-income individuals. So, when people, even when things normalize, as long as we have the on-premise shut down, which it is being shut down across nearly 100% of the country. I think 46 states, when I last checked, have shut down the on-premise. I'm sorry, I blanked. I guess it's not good to drink beer during interviews. We can still expect, even after this stocking up behavior dissipates, we can expect maybe 10%. I mean, this is arbitrary, but expect a meaningful increase in off-premise alcohol consumption. for beer, for craft, for everything. So after this kind of stock up normalizes, we'd still expect a boost in demand in the off-premise. And that is probably especially true for craft.
We've seen a number of brands find a lifeline, or at least a life preserver for the moment, in direct-to-consumer sales. We've seen restaurants and bars gain the ability to sell alcohol for takeout. There's a number of states that have loosened these laws. How difficult is it going to be to walk some of these back?
I kind of still think most of them will get walked back.
Absolutely.
But if you're a fan of this delivery, it's much more likely to stay around now than it was 3 months ago, certainly. But there are a lot of organizations that like things the way they were, and I think we can hope, and more places, more states have been liberalizing this slowly around the edges. So it'll be a little bit of an increase, but I think we're going to go mostly back to normal.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. I was speaking to an e-commerce manager at one of the largest beer companies in the country, and we were talking, and they said, yeah, we're totally going to go back to normal. But this could lubricate an important conversation and bring attention to the need to push for new state laws that will make e-commerce easier, not only in the on-premise, but in the off-premise, right? In general, even if you do create the laws, however, that does not create the consumer need, right? When we're talking about, I was speaking to somebody from that's much more knowledgeable than I am on this, and they said, we did a big research study and we found there's no viable use case for on-premise alcohol purchasing. Meaning, when you buy, Indian food, which is what I usually order online, I'm not going to buy a beer. I have beer in the fridge. I have drinks in the fridge. I'm not going to pay that premium. I can get it somewhere else. It's also just a different occasion. You're not going to, when you're sitting at a bar with your friends waiting for food, you'll drink 3 or 4 drinks. So even if you were to order a drink with your food, you're not going to drink the 4 that you would normally have as during dinner, or the 3 that you normally have during, a long night. You'll have 1. So even under any circumstance, there's just not really that big of an opportunity, which is why it's likely that groups like Discus and the Beer Institute have not invested meaningful resources to kind of change these laws around the country. I think the consequence of this could be that the restaurant associations and the trade organizations for alcohol, and it would be great to see wholesalers also come in and try and make some of this possible, and try and, even if they aren't extended in the short term, create the conversation awareness and dedicate the resources to change it over the long term.
It's worth saying there's probably a difference between restaurants selling alcohol as well, because that all goes through the distribution tier, as opposed to self-distribution by a craft brewery, right? So if you're a distributor in a restaurant sells something, that's probably fine. You were involved in that sale. A craft brewer is a little bit different.
Absolutely. So if I'm, Torching Crown, which is currently delivering beer through that New York order, right, it's a steeper road to getting that ability than, something that passes through all 3 tiers.
But Jim, you saw that tweet reply from another New York brewer, right?
Yeah. And it's just that this stuff doesn't provide that much, of a lift compared to, what you're losing in the tap room, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because right now, I think there's definitely going to be an bias in reporting, not in a bad way. It's not a criticism, but there's going to be a bias in reporting towards happy stories here, right? The reason you get attention to somebody who's doing successful work is because they're, it's like shared on social media. it's like, oh man, look at Torch and Crown. John Dancer is doing such an amazing job, and it gets retweeted, and everyone gets excited about it, and it comes to everyone's attention. But for every one success story, I can't imagine there aren't 10 total flops. We got the thing I'm referring to was somebody who tweeted from Interborough, I think, that was saying they've gotten one order each of the last 2 days.
Ouch.
And that, I think that's going to be much more of a norm. And, I think Torch and Crown would be very much an exception.
Yeah. So when this ends, if it ever ends, which I imagine it will, what do we come out looking like? What's the beer industry look like on the other side of this?
Attrited.
Listen, this is obviously much better for big craft brewers. I've been kind of on the side that craft beer roll-ups are, going to be the dominant form of craft. I mean, if they're not considered that already, the dominant form of craft, and this can only accelerate it, right? Being part of an organization that can help you weather a storm like this, you have extra resources, you have access to capital. I kind of expect more consolidation. I couldn't hazard a guess as to how many people won't be able to open their doors after this. I hope it's not that many, but I fear that the years of constant brewery growth, 1,000 new breweries a year, I mean, that has to come to a screeching halt.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think I've heard numbers. I think it's irresponsible to repeat them because I haven't been able to, interrogate those numbers that much. My interest is more about, on the consumer side, what are the things we know will not change, right? What we know will not change is the value of local, right? The value of storytelling, the value of representing something as a brand, standing for something as a brand, even if it chafes some consumers, you're still going to want to be able to stand for something and have it match whatever your consumers, identity or kind of value and belief system is. The other side is, the health and wellness stuff. I think that is not going to end at all. I don't think this is going to put a dent in that because if you look historically on like what changes with income, like ceteris paribus, all else equal, when people get higher income, they spend more on food and better beverage, right? But when you look at other things like education, income changes, your food buying is healthy. When you have a high education, your food buying is healthy, but lower cost healthy foods when you're when you're lower income, but still same level of education. That is a very convoluted way of saying that somebody who eats healthy before a recession or something like that aren't going to continue eating healthy, perhaps down to a lower cost healthy product. So I think that's another thing that I think is just not going to be affected by this.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if we wanted to skip this horrible year and look at 2021, consumer demand for all the things that craft delivers and represents shouldn't be notably different than it was going into this.
Yeah. Craft still has a beautiful story to tell. They still have a great local vibe. They still have the advantage of being, a community hub, a place for culture, a place for music, a place for meeting up. That is not going to change overnight. That's not going to change because of a 6-month quarantine. It just might take a long time for people to have the income to support the channel. It might take a long time for people to, feel safe to go out, but that's still going to be what they care about.
Well, this has been great, guys. Stick around after this so you can share that scary number with me so I can go hide in the corner and cry. But before we wrap up, plug the podcast and let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, Jim consistently fails to do this adequately. He forgets the name of our freaking website. So the podcast is called Liquid Assets. It's We have amazing guests. We have the head of e-commerce from Constellation Brands on earlier this year. A lot of people who are really cool, and it's really about the business of the beverage industry. So it's not just telling stories or telling about their company. We don't talk about Constellation Brands when we talk to Constellation Brands e-commerce guy. We ask, what's the e-commerce landscape like? So I think it's a great place to get information about the industry, about consumer trends, and about things like e-commerce.
Awesome. Thanks for doing this, guys.
Thank you very much. A pleasure.